The talk tonight is about really, I think, talking a little bit about the idea of education in the West in terms of Islam. And there's certainly a crisis that many of us are experiencing. I think it's actually a crisis that's taking place all over the world. We have a dearth of scholars, Muslim scholars, around the world. We're in great need of Muslim scholars. We have issues that are confronting this ummah that have actually really unprecedented conditions. And really, because most of the people in Islamic training now are usually third, fourth, or fifth grade intellects, because of the position that Islam has been unfortunately given in the Muslim ummah. And I think one of the tribulations that has been thrust upon this ummah is a direct result of the low status that Islamic studies has in the eyes of the ummah. And I'll say one thing, what I've noticed about a lot of Muslims in the West is that they tend to get interested in Islamic education because they're worried about their children going astray in the American society. And oftentimes they send their children to a Sunday school, or they send them to the masjid, expecting the imam or the masjid to kind of take care of it and make sure that they don't end up on drugs or with a boyfriend or with a girlfriend or something of that sort. But really, they don't want them that committed to Islam. In fact, they say, we want you to be a Muslim, but really inside what they're saying, we don't want you to be too Muslim. And they get a little upset and edgy when they start seeing their children maybe even getting actively involved in Islam, because they see that as a threat in many ways, or undermining the quote-unquote future that the parents already have mapped out for their children. And that is really sad. That's pathetic to me. Traditionally, if a young person wanted to study Islam in the Muslim ummah, that was actually considered the highest vocation. In fact, medicine was actually one of the lower vocations, and the idea of being an engineer was just something unheard of to the, muhandis. I mean, Fir'aun was the great muhandis, and Haman, Ibn Sarha, Haman was the muhandis of the ummah of the Egyptians. And certainly we haven't seen any engineers that can even come close to what the pharaohs produced. Really, I mean, all these airplanes and things, they're going to fall by the wayside soon enough. Those pyramids are still around, and people are still wondering how they got those rocks on each other. So, and I'll tell you just a little side thing about Haman. I once read in a book a Christian diatribe against the Muslims, and making out that Haman, because there's a Haman mentioned in the Old Testament related to Nimrod, which is a Babylonian figure. And this Christian was saying that the Prophet Muhammad obviously heard this story on a caravan and got it mixed up, got the Haman of Egypt mixed up with the Haman of Babel. Right? And I remember reading this and thought about it and really didn't have an answer or reply. I just trusted that either the Bible got it backwards and the scribe got the Quranic Haman mixed up with the Nimrodic, or there were two Haman, simple as that. I didn't really think of any other explanation. But recently, Maurice Bucaille published a book called the Pharaohs, the Quran and the Pharaohs. And he asked an Egyptologist from France, one of the top Egyptologists, if he'd ever heard the name Haman. And he said, actually, I know that name. I've read that name in a hieroglyphic. And he asked him if he could trace it and find it for him. And he was the chief architect of Ramses II, and was actually the builder of some of the temples and the pyramids of Ramses II. And that was completely inaccessible knowledge by this Egyptologist's own admittance. He said that the Prophet Muhammad in no way could have had that information in the 7th century, because it was in hieroglyphic and not available to people until really the late 19th century. So that's just a little set aside. What I want to do before I go into really the situation, I want to look a little bit at really what the Quran is telling us about, because the idea of a Quranic worldview and how we obtain a Quranic worldview and how we inculcate a Quranic worldview into our children should concern us all as Muslims. I think the first thing to recognize that in the Quran, to me, there are three very strong themes in the Quran. The most dominant theme is naturally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran is literally letting us know who the Lord of the worlds is. And the book begins, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, which according to Malik was the first ayah of the Quran. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. It begins right from the start by letting us know that praise alone is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then tells us who Allah is by saying He's Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of all the worlds. And then again, Maliki Yawmiddin lets us know Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, gives us the attributes, the merciful, the compassionate, and then lets us know also that not only is He the Lord of all the worlds, He's also the possessor, Maliki Yawmiddin, and Maliki Yawmiddin, the king of the day of the debts falling due, or the day of judgment itself. And the Quran goes on in the most eloquent language that has ever graced the ears of human beings to literally describe to us in the language that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to describe Himself about who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And there are many, many ayahs, and really if you look up the word Allah in the Quran, in any fahras, you will just literally see pages, because so many ayahs mention this oft-repeated word in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I think the summation that we can come to, or the conclusion that we could come to, is that the Quran is telling us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is no thing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is the hearing and the seeing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, that He has no peer. There is no one who is a peer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the idea of Tawheed being central to any Islamic education is a given. We can't even debate that issue. And literally inculcating in our youth and in our own lives the reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone is worthy of worship. La ilaha illallah. And the ilaha here is a negation of any form of divinity, anything worthy of worship, illallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the kalima itself, which is really what all of the prophets have brought to human beings, to take them out of the worship of created things to the worship of the creator of things, is the most important thing that our children and our own lives should be filled with. And really the meaning should impact us in a way that transcends lip service. In fact, Zurkashi says that none of the letters of the kalima itself are shafawi letters, or what they call labials. None of them come from the lips, because Allah does not want the kalima to be said simply with the lips. But they're all what are called ahruf jawfiyah, or the hollow letters, that they have to come from the center, from the innermost being of the human being himself and herself. And if they don't, then really this is what we call a munafiq, or a hypocrite, who is a creature that lives in a tunnel of contradiction. Nafaq in Arabic is a tunnel, and nafqa was the tunnel of the yarbu', which is a desert creature, they call it jerboa. And this little creature used to pop up one side, and he would look around. And if he saw any danger, he'd shoot to the other side, and he'd get out that way. So he always had a way out. And that's the nature of the munafiq. You see, they always have a makhraj, they always have a way out. They came to the Prophet said, let's go fight jihad. They say it's summertime, it's too hot, let's wait till winter. When the winter came, the Prophet said, let's go fight jihad. They say it's wintertime, too cold, let's wait till summer. And this is their nature. You know, mutadabdibun, they go between, they oscillate. You see, I mean, this is the state of the munafiq. It's a horrific state. They're in the lowest level of the fire. And Like one of them said, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, rahimahullah, mentions about a man making a dua, one of the salaf, Allahumma ahlik al-munafiqeen. May you destroy all of the hypocrites. And one of the men who heard that, one of the ulama said, إياك ما تقول, beware of what you're saying. والله لو استجابك الله لاستوحشت في الطرقات من قلة السالكين. If Allah would have answered your prayer, you'd be alone on the streets because so few people would be walking on those streets. And I'll give you an important find, and if you take this and take it to heart, I think it will serve to be very beneficial in your life. Hasan al-Basri said, لا يأمن النفاق إلا المنافق. No one feels safe from hypocrisy except the hypocrite. So if you're feeling safe and secure, or if you're feeling that those eyes don't really apply to you, then think again. Look at your lives. Look at where you're at. Look at what you've done for Islam. We know what Islam has done for us. We can go on for days about that. You know, my personal life from before I was Muslim and now, what Islam has done for me, I could go on this, you know, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَن تَحْصُوهَا. You'll never enumerate the blessings of Allah. But when we start asking, what have we actually done for Islam? Then we're in another, we can run out of things pretty quick, I think. You see, then we're in another boat. And that's the boat of the Munafiqun. And it's got a lot of holes in it. And it's sinking fast. And so that's something we have to ask ourselves about, really. What is our goal in life? What's our purpose here on earth? What are we doing here? Is it to be comfortable? Is it to have nice houses, to have nice heating systems, to have beautifully ornamented masjids that we can feel comfortable in? This is a nice masjid. I know I'm in a different part of town because I've been Masjid al-Taqwa, that's nice. There's a big difference. But is that the goal? Is that it? Is it, you know, the nice dome, the khutbah? Khutbahs are put on tombs as well. Dead people can be under khutbah. So it's just interesting to think about that. Now, some people might start feeling a little uneasy right now. What's he trying to do to us? We came here to feel good about ourselves. Maybe. I don't know. But, you know, I plan things and then other things come out. And I'm somebody that, if I do anything, I try to talk from my heart. And words that come from the heart, like Sayyidina Ali said, will reach the heart. And words that don't come from the heart, لا يتجاوز الآذان, they don't go past the ears. But there's another problem with that too, is that hearts that have so much rihla over them, like heedlessness over them, even words that come from the heart sometimes don't penetrate those hearts. Because they get so encrusted. So that's something that for all of us to ask, including myself. Don't think in any way I'm putting myself outside of anything I'm saying. Because that's foolish. That's a type of stupidity. If you look then, and you know, Tawheed is such an endless topic because it's the subject of the endless, infinite Creator. But if you go to the next theme in the Quran, it is the man himself, al-insan. What is a human being? I mean, the Quran begins by defining human beings, categorizing them into three categories. That's all there is. And we will all fit into one of those three categories. And the Quran, right from the outset, first it tells you, this book doesn't have any doubts. And then it tells you who human beings are, what categories they fit into, and asks us to think about where we fit in there. And there's only three. There's a mu'min, there's a kafir, and there's a munafiq. And the mu'min gets 4 ayahs. 4 ayahs. Because the mu'min is not a complicated creature. The mu'min is something the inside and outside are the same. So they're not difficult to define. And then the kafirs, even easier, because they really have no depth at all. But then this tricky character comes in there. 13 ayahs to describe the munafiq. 13 ayahs that Allah uses to describe the munafiq, and really emphasizes the nature of the munafiq. So the insan is defined in the Quran beautifully. And then Allah tells us about the nature of the human being. The human being's created, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, was created with weakness. The insan is created ajula, is created hurriedly. Halu'a is somebody that gets anxious. Manu'a, that withholds, this, doesn't like to give out. You see, it tells us all about the nature of the human being, and gives us this so that we can understand who we are. So that we can literally come to know who we are. Because if you know who you are, and you understand who you are, then you can know who you are not. And we are certainly not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so knowledge of the self is directly related to knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those who do not know themselves are incapable of knowing their Lord. They're incapable by the very nature of the self. Because human beings will fall into two categories. And the Quran enunciates this beautifully in that on the one hand, Allah tells us in many verses that the insan is created min ma'in maheen, from a vile fluid. Min sulalatin min teen, from a lineage of mud. From a lineage of mud that we are created from. Min turab. And sha'akum. Min al-ard, from the earth itself. And like coming out like a vegetative growth that arises out of the earth. So Allah gives us all the, and then on the other hand, Allah says, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, and tells us that He's placing in the earth this Khalifa, and tells us, عَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, He taught Adam the names, all of them, and then He commanded the angels to bow down to our Father. The angels were commanded to bow down to our Father, to go into sajda, which is not a sajda of ubudiyyah, but a sajda of tashrif. Because the sajda, prior to Islam, there was a sajda called tashrif, which even some of the kings, they used to do sajda to them. And this sajda was prohibited in Islam. But the Adam, alayhi salam, the angel were commanded to bow down. So it lets us know that the human being is a high thing. لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have ennobled the children of Adam. But then we've got all these ayahs that tell us that we're ma'in maheen, that we're biofluid, that we're dirt, that we're turab. كُلُّكُم مِّنْ آدَمَ وَآدَمْ مِّن تُرَابٍ. All of you are from Adam, and Adam is from dust. So where do these two, where do we fit between these two views of because Allah is speaking to nas. Those who He is telling that they are from a vile fluid, that they're from dirt, that they're from dust, those are those who transit about the earth. يَتَقَلَّبُونَ فِي الْبِلَادِ. That they're مَغْرُورُونَ. That they think that they're gods. They think that they can exploit people. They think that they can oppress people. The ظَالِمُونَ, the mujrimun, the fasiqun. People that really think they can do whatever they want. Allah is telling them, reminding them of their origin. But then there's another category of people. And those are the people who are humble. And sometimes actually have a lower opinion of themselves. Like the oppressed people that tend to see themselves as worthless. And Allah calls those people and tells them, you're the khulafa. You're Bani Adam. We've ennobled you. You're something amazing. You're people of knowledge. We have taught your father and given you the ability to acquire knowledge and commanded you iqra. And so elevates the movement to such a degree. Now, the movement is literally needs to rise up and recognize who he is and pull that facet, that asi down. And they meet in this middle way that we call Islam. So Islam pulls the oppressed up and the oppressor down. It pulls those up who think they're the khulafa, but they don't have the conditions of khalifa.
And it reminds them of their origin, that they are simply vile fluid, that they're going back to the earth from which they came. But it takes those who are oppressing the earth and raises them up and ennobles them and dignifies them. It takes the arrogant Quraysh and makes them pray in the same line with the people that they used to enslave, like Bilal, al-Habashi. The Ajmis that they used to look down on, like Salman al-Farisi. The Romans that they had no respect for, like Suhaib al-Rumi. See, this is what Islam does. It takes those people and it takes these, and they meet in the middle and they become brothers. They become brothers. So the Quran literally teaches us who the insan is. And then the next element that is essential is to, once we know who the insan is, we have to know what haya is, what the nature of life itself is. And if we don't know what life is, then we become deluded. Allah says, لَا تَغُرَّنَّكُمُ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا. Don't be deluded by the life of this world. وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ الْغَرُورِ. And don't let the deluder delude you. Don't be led astray by the deluder. So the Quran literally lets us know what life is. And it distinguishes two very clearly demarcated lives in the Quran. حَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا وَحَيَاةُ الْآخِرَةِ. And إِنَّ دَارُ الْآخِرَةِ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. The abode of the akhirah, the last abode, is the hayawan. That is the true life. لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. If they but knew. But Allah says, كَلَّا بَلْ تُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَةِ. You love the life of this world. وَتَذَرُونَ الْآخِرَةِ. And you put off the life of the next world. So the dunya is called ajila, and the human being is ajul. But the Quran teaches him to be a man or a woman of sabr, wasbir. All through the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ صَابِرِينَ. And sabr is the key to success in this life and in the next life. And this is why the emphasis of sabr itself is throughout the Quran. The ability for the Muslim to be patient, to be able to reason. If you lose your patience, you can't reason. The most patient of men after the Prophet of Allah is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, who didn't lose his reason when everybody lost their reason. Because the nature of shaja'ah, or courage, is that there has to be a stilled center. The brave man can neither be impetuous nor cowardly, because those are extremes of which the mean is courage. Somebody that just runs into the ranks or runs to do something without thinking about that, he might appear to be brave to those who see him, but in reality he's impetuous. He's impetuous. And the one who is cowardly and cannot act has no bravery. But the brave one is the one between the two. It's the mean, the one who has the ability to be patient, to assess the situation, to keep his rational state, and then to act. And if you look at the key event after the death of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when all of the Muslims lost their state, including Umar ibn al-Khattab, it was Abu Bakr who came, assessed the situation, looked around, saw, he heard the Prophet ﷺ had died, but he hadn't seen it for himself. Before making any judgment, he went in and checked to see if the Prophet of Allah was dead. When he ascertained that he was dead, ﷺ, then he went out and acted. Now only a man of patience and courage could do that. And that's why he, after the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, is the greatest of the Muslims. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and many other reasons, is the iman that the Prophet ﷺ said, if the iman of my ummah was in one mizan, one scale, and the iman of Abu Bakr in another, the iman of Abu Bakr would outweigh it. So the nature of haya, Allah tells us that the akhirah is the true life, and not to be deluded by this life, and then reminds us that not only is it temporal, But death is closer to you, like the Prophet ﷺ said, than the strap of your sandal. And he said, أَكْثِرُ مِنْ ذِكْرِكُمْ هَذَمَ اللَّذَّاتِ. Do much remembrance of the destroyer of pleasures, the destroyer of delights. Do much dhikr of death itself. And one of the meditative practices of the Salaf was to reflect on the ahwal al-qiyamah, which are the states of the qiyamah, to literally place themselves in their graves. This is a practice that's written in many books of Raqaiq. To place themselves in their grave, to reflect on munkar and nakir and the su'al, the question in the grave, then to reflect on the actual ba'ath, that we are raised up, that we must stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be taken to account for our actions. That is Yawm al-Ard, when all of your actions, like Abdurrahman al-Awza'i, the great Imam from Lebanon, Sham area, buried in Beirut, had a madhab, brilliant scholar. He said that on the Day of Judgment, your lives will be played before you. تُعْرَضُ عَلَيْكُمْ. Played before you, shown to you, moment by moment. Moment by moment. And we have to bear that. We have to sit through that. So this practice, which is to take the self to a conscious state of the temporality of the world, and recognize that our investments in the world, we have no guarantees of them. We don't know about tomorrow. Now this, on the other hand, should not prevent, should not put somebody in a paralyzed condition where they cannot act, because we're mu'minun, and we trust in Allah. So there's a fine middle balance. We're not like the Christians that will run off to the monastery. I mean, somebody once, I was giving a lecture at a university about Islam, and this person said, you know, how difficult the Christian way was of the priests who didn't have to get married, and who couldn't get married, and had to live in the monastery, and this and that. And I said, no, that's the easy way out. See, Islam doesn't let us do that. The imam has to get married, he has to have the whole blessing. We could say catastrophe, but we say the whole blessing of the responsibilities of the dunya. The whole blessing of the wife, the children, and they are a blessing, but they're also difficult. They're burdens, they're responsibilities, they're amana. And amana is heavy. Amana is heavy, because the wife is an amana in the hands of the husband. And he's responsible for how he treats her. كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ. All of you are shepherds. وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَتِهِ. And you will all be asked about the flock that Allah placed in your charge. So we will be asked about our wives. Did we educate them? Did we treat them with ma'roof? Did we live with them in a good way? Did we respect them and elevate them? Or did we burden them? Were we unjust to them? The Prophet said, لا يفرق المؤمن المؤمنة. A mu'min should never despise a mu'minah. إن كره خلقا رضي بخلق آخر. If he dislikes one characteristic of her, he should find something that he likes, that blinds him. وَالْحُبُّ يُعْمِي. Love blinds. And so you really shouldn't look at the faults of your wife. You see? And just a quick, that I'm on this topic for the men. Umar ibn al-Khattab, I love this story. Umar ibn al-Khattab, a Bedouin once came to complain about his wife to the Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar. And he knocked on the door, and then he heard inside Umar's wife screaming at Umar. And he said, SubhanAllah, I thought I had a musibah. Umar's got an even harder time than me. And he started leaving. And Umar opened the door, and he said, where are you going? And he said, oh, nothing, I didn't want anything. He said, no, you wanted something, what did you want? He said, no, nothing, I made a mistake. He said, I'm asking you by Allah. He said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I was having a difficult time with my wife, and I came to complain to you. But when I saw what you're having to face, I just realized that I shouldn't even complain. And Omar laughed. Now this is Omar who people think was probably beating his wife or something, right? Omar laughed and he said, Hiya zawji, this is my wife. Turabbi awladi, she brings up my children. وَتَطْبُخُ طَعَامِ, and she prepares my food. وَتُنَظِّفُ بَيْتِي, and she cleans my house. وَتَغْسِلُ ثِيَابِي, and washes my clothes. أَلَا أَصْبِرُ عَلَيْهَا, shouldn't I be patient with this woman? You see? I mean, this is the honor of Islam, really. And even doing those things in fiqh, as your imam can tell you, are not wajibat as debate. The woman doesn't have to do those as wajibat. That's ikram from her. So we should be thanking, alhamdulillah, we should be thanking the women. If they cook your meal, you should thank them, because that's a gift from them to you. And ta'i'ah doesn't mean obedient only in Arabic. Ta'i'ah means willing. You know, ta'i'an or karihan, come willingly or unwillingly, you see. And willingness comes out of a desire, out of a love. Ta'ah should come, our ta'ah, obedience to Allah, should come out of love. That's the highest form of ta'ah, is to be for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because they call it the ta'atul abid. When you do something out of fear, they call that the obedience of bondspeople. People like a slave who's afraid his master will punish him. And they say that the one who does it for reward, that's called ta'atul tujjar, the obedience of the merchants who are always seeing what they can get out of it. Right? How many hasanat? If I do this, I'm going to get 25 hasanat. Got 15 yesterday, and I get 200 from Quranic. So he's calculating, like at the end of the day, when he finishes his marketplace, he calculates how much he made. And we're not belittling that, because Allah has targhib and tarheeb. But Imam Nawawi says the highest form of obedience is that which emerges out of love. The willingness to obey Allah out of love. And in the same way, the wife, when she serves the husband out of willingness. This is a house that has mahabba in it. See, Allah ja'ala bainakum mawaddatan wa rahmah. He placed between you mawadda. And mawadda, by the way, is an interesting word, because Allah could have said mahabba. But mahabba can indicate also a type of erotic love or sensual love. Mawadda is not a sensual type of love. Al-Wadud is one of the names of Allah. It's a type of love that transcends the physical. So this is the type of love that should be the basis of the house of the family. So knowing what life itself is, and recognizing that the hayat al-dunya is temporary, it's fania by its nature, and it dissipates and it goes. And we will be in our graves. And that's an important thing to reflect on. And then once we put these things into place and understand them, that like Allah, when He says, اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم تهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا. Allah says that the likeness of this world, know, have this knowledge. That's a command from Allah. Know that the likeness of this world, the world by its very nature is a play and a pastime. Lahu is like entertainment. There's an interesting book that I would recommend everybody reading. It's called Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is about life in America. Because that's what the Americans do now. They literally amuse themselves to death. You see, they just look for one. I mean, even their elections become entertainment. You see, their political discourse becomes entertainment, sound bites. Who can be the clever one? Who's the best looking? Who has the best presentation? This is all just wahm. It's all illusion, and yet this is what their lives have become. Trivialized. Fir'aun by his nature trivializes a people, belittles them, treats them with istighfar, and then they obey him. They obey him by the nature of it. Like the Arabs, they used to say, "Jawwa' kalbak yatba'ak." Keep your dog hungry and it'll follow you. Sammin kalbak yatkalak. And fatten up your dog and it'll eat you. So this is what they do, you see, in America. They keep these people, they're hungry all the time, and they give them tidbits of their music and their films and their entertainment and the latest fashion. And they think they're getting food, but they're just temporary snacks of junk food with no calories, no values. And so the spirit continues to diminish until there's nothing left. There's nothing left of their spirit. And then they're the living dead. لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا, like the people of New York. That's the scariest place I've ever been to. It makes Karachi look like paradise. I'm serious. I was just looking, we were driving through there, and I said, if I didn't have a better description of hell in the Quran, I think I was in it. Zamharir, too, you got the cold. So, move out, had to, make hijrah, do something, get out of there, come to California. I told them last night, how can you live here? Flushing. I said they ought to flush it down the toilet. You know, really, this is unbelievable. And then those towers, you know. SubhanAllah. And then don't for anybody get any ideas about blowing them up either, because that's not what I'm saying. Just desert them. Just leave them. So now, where does this human being in all of this? The human being, according to the Quran, has two basic choices. He either follows ittiba' al-dhan, when yattabi'una illa al-dhan, they only follow conjecture. Or he follows Allah and His Messenger, which is certainty. This is ilm al-yaqeen. It's certainty. What has come from Allah and His Messenger is certainty. So when we follow it, we have absolute certitude. Everything else is dhan, including all the sciences of the dunya. Don't think these are exact sciences. They are not. They do not have any exact sciences, including mathematical knowledge. There are no exact sciences other than the knowledge that Allah and His Messenger have given us. That we are mortal, we will die, we will be raised up. That's certitude, that is exact. But E equals MC squared is just a model that came into the head of, on the one hand, this seemingly brilliant person, on another hand, almost mentally challenged individual in the politically correct language of the 1990s. Because he couldn't even tie his shoelaces. So, really, we have to wonder about all these brilliant people that don't even know why they were created. You have all the things on the wall, PhD, doctor of this, doctor of that, and get up and lecture for hours. You just say to them, ask them the most simple question that you could present to a West African illiterate. Who created you? You ask these two, and they, I don't know. We're still thinking, that's out. It's out. We're still thinking about it. Carl Sagan hasn't informed us yet. Right? It'll be on Channel 9 soon enough. We're waiting for the White House to officially announce whether there's a God or not. You see, they don't know. But you take, in terms of this culture, the most ignorant human being on the earth, right? Some poor farmer in West Africa, who I live with those people, and can't read or write, and you ask him who created him, and he'll say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you ask him, what happens when you die? He said, I go back to Allah, I'm raised up. Allah asked me what I did in my life. So he knows that. Now that is the highest knowledge. La ilaha illallah, there's nothing higher. And that's what this deen did. It took, you know, I was in the United Arab Emirates, and there was the illiterate Bedouin who happened to be very wealthy because they were from the royal family, and we went, some people asked us to go give them dawah, right? And I went, and there they were with their guys, they have their eagles or their falcons, and sitting around with their asa, you know, their sticks, and talking in the Bedouin language. You know, and I'm sitting there, and he asked me, what were you before you were Muslim? I said, a Christian. He said, oh. He said, now what do they believe? I said, well, they believe Isa ibn Allah. And then his younger brother, who was about 18, probably, said to him, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. And I said, well, why? He said, well, he didn't have a father, right? So that means Allah must have been his father. This is a Bedouin, right? Now his brother, who heard him say this, took his stick and hit him. And he said, "Lam yalid wa lam yulad." And I just said, SubhanAllah, look at this Quran. It takes an ignorant human being and gives him a deep philosophical understanding. There he is, he doesn't even know the word philosophy. And he has a deeper understanding than all of these Christians running about in America in their fancy cars and their houses and their telephone that they can take wherever they want to go without any cord. Their cordless telephones and their answering machines. Hello, you've reached 942-316. Please leave a message. And they can do all that. They're clever and everything. But you ask them, does Allah have a son? Yes, he has a son. And they're that Bedouin saying, let me do that. And that might have been the only thing he knew from the Quran. But that'll take him to Jannah. And lack of knowing that will take other people to another place. So this is, I mean, the bounty of this deen is really unbelievable. So when we look now, you have ittiba' al-dhann and ahwa. And the Quran talks about those who follow their ahwa, their own passions, their own whims, their own desires. And then it has the idea of ittiba' shaitan, also following shaitan, being led astray by the shayateen, who are not just these invisible creatures that whisper in the grass. In fact, the worst shaitans are the shayateen al-ins, the human ones. And they don't get locked up in Ramadan. Right? It's the marada of the shayateen al-jinn. But the shayateen al-ins, they're still all over in New York, walking around and doing whatever they're doing. I'm picking on New York tonight. But you're in Jersey, right? Oh, well, he's there trying to clean the place up. So, that's jihad. But somebody who's got a grocery store there and not doing any dawah, I just recommend he go back to where he came from. It's better he'd be a street sweeper in Karachi than living in New York and having to see all that human suffering every day and not even offering them a solution. Not even offering them a solution. Somebody that knows La ilaha illallah, he every day of his life, he sees these human beings walking around in the depths of despair. They're in the depths of despair, really. Don't think otherwise. And all you have to do is read their own statistics and read their own sociological studies of their major cities. Really, they're in despair. And we're supposed to be these people that take people out of that despair. That tell them, no, you have to put your head on the ground and you're not going to feel better until you do, no matter how many Tylenols you take. You see, really, you're not going to feel better until you put the head on the ground. That's what we have to tell these people. Call them to La ilaha illallah. So the following the truth, the haqq, is what Allah tells us to do. Now, just in terms of where we're at in the United States, in terms of schools, unfortunately, I would say my own experience in many of the Muslim schools is that they are oftentimes literally replications of the public school system with what are this kind of appendage that they call Islamic studies, and oftentimes done after lunch. Like they'll have computers. I saw one school they had computer studies first thing in the morning when people are bright and fresh. And even the idea of teaching children computers at an early age is highly questionable as a pedagogical practice. But then they had Arabic and Quran after lunch when they're all tired, they want to go home. And that happens in the Muslim countries as well, what they call Islamic studies, the dirasat al-Islamiyya, which doesn't really exist. I mean, every type of dirasa is Islamiyya, right? And that's another thing, the whole idea of a madrasa Islamiyya. And I don't know if you have one here, so I'm not picking on you, but that's a misnomer. To call a madrasa Islamiyya, that is a misnomer. And the Muslims traditionally never called their schools or universities an Islamic madrasa because it's like, there's no point. I mean, either a madrasa is Islamic or it's not. And if it is, you don't need to spell it out. It's called lisan al-hal. And oftentimes when you make a claim, especially if it's not a true claim, in fact, Ahmed Zarruf, and I'll give you a qa'idah that he once gave, this is a principle. He said, anyone that makes a claim higher than his own claim, Allah will expose him for what he is, fraudulent. And anyone that makes a claim that he does possess, Allah will take it away from him. And anyone that makes a claim lower than his own claim, Allah will raise him up to a higher station. You see, to a higher maqam. And this is why we say, وَإِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. You see, I mean, in the Quran you always say that, min al-tab'id. You know, I'm from amongst the Muslims. And that's a type of humility. You see, that's a type of humility. The Quran's teaching us humility, not to make claims. When the A'rab قالت الأعراب آمنا, they were commanded to don't say آمنا, ولكن قولوا أسلمنا. Say you're Muslim, don't say you're mu'min. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلُ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ, because Iman hasn't come into your hearts yet. So don't make that claim because it's not true. So a madrasa is not Islamiyya because you're teaching Islamic studies in one section. That is not an Islamic madrasa. Right? I mean, an Islamic madrasa we have our own worldviews, methodologies, and if we're simply just teaching sciences without looking and analyzing them in terms of the methodologies of our own understandings in Tawheed, because knowledge is not disembodied from cultures and from worldviews. And if you study the philosophy of knowledge and epistemology, that these people in the West understand that very deeply, that any type of knowledge is directly related to the culture that produced it. In other words, you cannot sever a culture from its historical, intellectual legacy. In the same way that it is Tawheed that produced the cultures of Islam and the civilization of Islam, and it is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that produced our medicine, produced our mathematics, produced our astronomy. In the same way, it's the Christian crooked book that produced the crookedness of Western civilization, that produced the idea of neutron bombs and things that really changed the creation of Allah. So worldviews are very much connected to the sciences that they produce. And that's why science is not a neutral thing. And the idea of knowledge being separate from a civilization is a foolish assumption. In many ways, Islam would never have produced much of what this culture has produced by the very nature of the Islamic worldview. Which is not saying that Islam is in any way anti-science. No, we had science, we produced science. You know, this is just an absurd argument. But the idea that somehow science is just a neutral topic, no, because we know many of the theories in sciences now are antithetical to Islam completely. And also many of the experimental practices that take place are antithetical to Islam. In this country, you know, we know about Nazi Germany, but this country had an experiment, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, that ended officially in 1972, that took a group of illiterate black people from the South and watched them over a 40-year period move into tertiary stage syphilis, where you lose your mind. And they would not treat them, despite the fact that after the experiment started in the 1930s, by the 1940s there was a cure for that disease. They refused to give those people that cure. And never told them that they had syphilis, just so they could watch what happened to these people. And that's all the Quran. I'm not making this up. This isn't conspiracy theories. This stuff you can get in the library, right? And we know that they were using radioactive iodine on children from ghettos, you see, to see what happened. Because they wanted to see the effects of iodine on these people. And they used their own soldiers in Nevada just to test radioactive effects by making them rush into areas that had just been immediately bombed with their nuclear bombs to see how much radioactivity would be absorbed by those troops. Many of them who died of cancers and who were infertile and could not produce children as a result. So this is the type of disembodied, rational science that this wonderful culture produces. So we should be very wary of simply taking all of these things lock, stock, and barrel. Our schools should be really guarded in terms of what we're disseminating, what we're teaching our children, the deen of efficiency, you see, because their God is efficiency, and our God is a merciful God, and oftentimes efficiency and mercy are mutually exclusive. The efficient solution is not always the humane solution. You see, when they talk about economic success, they talk about gross national product, irrespective of the thousands of people losing their jobs, as long as the profits are up. You see, this is not our worldview. Because Islam, if everybody's liberties and rights aren't secured, then nobody's are. And that's our tradition. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think, and I'm not in any way questioning anybody here, or, I'm sure you're the good people. If you're in the masjid, you're the good people. Really. I'm in no way, alhamdulillah, it's a blessing. People here, we're inshallah the people of Ahlul Masajid. Those are the people, that's one of the 7 people that Allah will give His shade on the Yawm al-Qiyamah, a heart connected to the masjid. And I know people struggle hard just to come to the masjid. People are tired, people work, people do these things. So, alhamdulillah, in no way am I trying to offend anybody or anything. I'm just putting out things for all of us to reflect on and think about. And just in terms of Islamic schools in this country, I think that when we start establishing schools that are going to produce scholars, then we can call them Islamic schools. When we produce schools that our children become hafiz of the Quran, learn the language of the Quran, the Arabic language, that when they graduate, they have an understanding of their deen, and not simply just what the Arabs call ru'us al-aqlam, like the tips of the pens, the 5 pillars. No, that's the Bedouin who's allowed just to know the 5 pillars. We're Hadari people. We're people of the city. City people have a higher taklif than the Bedouin people. So we want to produce really people, indigenous people in this country, that can take the deen to the next generation, because we're all going to be dead soon enough. Really, we're all going to be dead. And this life goes fast. And those of you who've got some gray beards in your hair know the truth of that statement. Really. And the younger people, it takes a little while for it to hit home. But it does. And it hits home soon enough. And once you start recognizing that life is dissipating, that life is literally leaving us, then we just have to prepare for the akhirah. And part of the preparation is ensuring that the deen is transmitted to the next generation, that there's some continuity there. Because we can build masajid, but if they're not youth that are going to replace all of us and carry the deen on, then we failed completely. We have failed completely. And the last thing that I will say about children, and I personally believe this, children in the Islamic tradition are born pure. They are born completely open to good and evil. But their natural state is a state of goodness. And if that is nurtured, they will grow up good. If it's neglected, they will grow up habituated to foul things. Qadi Abu Bakr says in his book on raising children, it's mentioned in the Madkhal, know that your children are amana, وَجَوْهَرَةٌ نَفِيسَةٌ أَوْدَعَهَا اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى عِنْدَكُمْ. They're a beautiful, precious jewel that Allah has given as an amana in your hands. فِإِنْ عَوَّدْتُهُمْ خَيْرًا تَعَوَّدَهُمْ. If you habituate them to good, they become habituated to it, and they grow up doing good. And if you habituate them to evil, they become habituated to it and grow up doing that. You have the reward of their good, and you have the wisdom of their evil. You see, so the parents, we are responsible for our children. And وَمَنْ وَجَدَ خَيْرًا فَلْيَحْمَدِ اللَّهِ. Whoever finds good, let him thank Allah. وَمَنْ وَجَدَ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ فَلَا يَلُومَنَّ إِلَّا نَفْسَهُ. And if he doesn't find it, if he finds other than that, let him only blame himself. Let him only blame himself. So with that, I'll just stop there. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
A question came in here, and then I'll open the floor for the brothers or the sister to ask the question, inshallah ta'ala. The question is saying, it's about he himself, he's as a person. When did you become a Muslim? I know a lot of people knows that, but he has to answer that, inshallah ta'ala. just because for the brothers and sisters who doesn't know, inshallah, the question is, when did you become a Muslim? How did you learn this Arabic language? So I'm not the only one who's so impressed with Arabic, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen. And the rest of the question is, you seem to have enough knowledge. Are you thinking about writing a book? So I'm going to leave this couple of questions for you to answer first, inshallah ta'ala.
About my own self, there's a book of which I don't get any royalties for, called American Jihad, and the last chapter is actually a story of my how I became Muslim. But I became Muslim when I was 17, and it was basically after a serious car accident that started getting me thinking about death, and I really wasn't very content with Christian religion at that time. So alhamdulillah, I did a study of different religions, and I actually, Islam made the most sense to me at that time. And so I was blessed by meeting some very good Muslims in California who introduced me to Islam. And actually, I became Muslim pretty much immediately after that. And alhamdulillah, I had the blessing of meeting Shaykh Hamza Yusuf, who was a wonderful man from the United Arab Emirates in Sharjah, who I met in London. And I was just starting to learn some Arabic then, and he invited me to come to the Emirates and study there, so I ended up going there, and that's pretty much where I started learning Arabic, which one of the first teachers I had of Arabic told me that you will never learn Arabic. You know, he said just take that as a given and just do your best, and I think that's very true, that Arabic is in fact, they call the dictionaries the oceans, the muhit, you know, because the Arabic language is really, it's just a study that will go on until the person dies, and you'll really never encompass the whole language. You seem to have some knowledge, and you plan to write any books in the future. I'm actually, alhamdulillah, I just finished something which I translated all of the sayings of Isa from the Arabic traditions that are in the various books like the Muslim and the books of the different collections of hadiths, some that were in Muwatta, Malik, and then some of the traditions that were more oral traditions that are mentioned in the Ihya that don't really have an Islam, but that still have some wisdom in them. And so I actually finished that, and inshallah that's going to be published soon. And I've been working on some other things. By the way you put the question, I'll probably agree with you on first of all, in terms of the Arabic language, that is outrageous for any Muslim to say that Arabic language is not important. Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu in his Risala says, وَيَجِبُ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ أَنْ يَتَعَلَّمَ مَا يَسِعُهُ جُهْدُهُ مِنَ الْعَرَبِيَّةِ. It is an obligation on every Muslim to learn what he is capable of learning from the Arabic language. And Umar, when he sent his governors out, he used to say, تَعَلَّمُوا الْعَرَبِيَّةَ وَعَلِّمُوهَا فَإِنَّهَا مِنَ الدِّينِ. Learn this Arabic language and teach it, because it's from the deen. And just as English has become the dominant language of the world, and we have people in Pakistan that speak English better than the Queen, and we have people in India, and they worked hard to learn that language and to perfect that accent. Not all of them have, some people have a hard time with the English accent. In fact, when I was in West Africa, when I used to speak English, the little kids would come around and they go, whoa, 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 because they thought it was a funny, it didn't have, like Arabic's it has a lot of strong sounds and you have to articulate them, whereas English you can kind of tell them and not really say anything. So I think on the contrary, in fact I personally believe one of the reasons for the deep decline of this ummah is the decline of the Arabic language and its importance. And I also think one of the reasons that the Arabs themselves have not produced much scholarship in a long time is due to the fact that the Arabic language has deteriorated so much
amongst the Arab peoples, and the dialects that they speak are actually the equivalent of like a pidgin English. It's difficult for a lot of Arabs to actually articulate, to have discourse at a kind of intellectual level. Many Arabs find it. I mean, I'm not making this up, am I? Yeah, they have a hard time, and I've met a lot of educated Arabs that have to use English all the time when the topics get a little difficult, because a lot of their higher education was in English and not in Arabic. And so, Hassan al-Banna, rahimahullah, he, in his 10 wasaya, one of them was to speak Fusha, because it's from the sha'air of this deen. And so he recognized the importance of that, of learning, because language is power. Language is power. And that's why the Quraysh had power over the rest of the Arabs, because they were the most eloquent of the Arabs. And to this day, you watch the politicians that are the ones that go a long way. They're the ones that are the most articulate, the most clever, the quickest to respond. Language is power. It always has been, it always will be. And those who are empowered by language, and one of the disempowering aspects of this culture is it keeps the minorities in this culture, it deprives them of an educated language. They don't want them to have language, because once you have language, you can begin to articulate your suffering, your exploitation, these type of things. But if you don't have the vocabulary, if you don't even know what the word exploitation means, you see, you can only experience it as an experience, but you can't identify it. You can say, whatever it is, I know I've got it. But once you learn exploitation, and that's one of the amazing things about Malcolm X, and Haddad Shabazz. This man, he memorized the dictionary in prison. And all of a sudden he was empowered by words. And the empowerment that he achieved through words is still reverberating to this day. He put out words out there that still impact people to this day. And the Quran is their words. The Quran is a language. And the most powerful Quran is when the language becomes embodied in human action. And that's the messenger of Allah. And that's why he literally, people couldn't even, they saw him, and the poor one Bedouin just started shaking. He went into a state of awe. And the Prophet said, Hawun alayk, just be, he said, I'm the son of a woman who used to eat jerky. Like they say, Hadid, the Arab jerky is kind of, it means, you're down to earth, don't worry, I'm a human being. You see, but that's the type of awe that Sayyidina Ali said, if you met him suddenly, you had awe. But if you spent time with him, it was sweetness and love. You see. And Abu Huraira, we know the hadith, he was walking, suddenly he saw the Prophet turn the corner, and Abu Huraira had a wet dream. And he saw the Prophet, and he hid behind the building. And the Prophet saw him do that, because he was embarrassed that he was in the state of junub, and he knew the Prophet would know. And so when he saw the Prophet later, the Prophet said, what were you doing today? He said, I was ashamed, because I hadn't taken a ghusl. And the Prophet said, Abu Hurairah, the moment doesn't ever, he's never junub. In other words, the moment is never impure. You see, the state is just a state, it's just a bodily state, but the heart isn't impure. So the Prophet's saying that that's what I want to meet. I want to meet the purity of your heart. I'm not concerned about the physical state of your body. You see. So that's how the Prophet was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So language, we have to learn Arabic, really. I think all of us should have a commitment, including the Arabs. Don't think that if I said, Arab had the jumla, Qama Zaydun wa Daraba Amran, he's going to say, oh, what? It's a long time ago I had Arab. I can't really, you see. Test them. You start learning Arab, and then you say, help me out on this jumla, and you'll see they get a little red face if they're light enough.
How do you make our schools produce scholars?
Well, I think, one of the things about memory is something, that many of our scholars were gifted with. And memory is not a condition in ijtihad, interestingly enough. In other words, to be a mujtahid by sharia, memory is not one of the conditions. In other words, to be what's called a hafid or a hakim, which is to memorize, to encompass the sunnah through memory, like Abu Dawud and these people, and they were phenomenal, had phenomenal memories, which is often attributed to the purity of heart and also the openings that Allah gave them, because memory is a fath from Allah. It was for some people, not for everybody, because we know there's shayateen. Memorize lots of things. You can meet bad people that have great memories, but generally the memory is, but that is not knowledge. Memory is not knowledge. Knowledge, because Allah says, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ حُمِلُوا التَّوْرَاةَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. The likeness of those who were given the Torah to carry, in other words, that understand and act upon, they didn't act on it, so they're like donkeys that just carry books on their back. So you can memorize all you want, if you never act on it, then you're just like a donkey. And himar is not a good thing in Arabic. In New York, I think it's okay. The Yankees, aren't they? The baseball team say that Yankee means donkey in Spanish. So, and the Democrats even, they took their symbol as a himar. And the Republicans, the field, like the same ones Abraham brought to destroy the Kaaba, because they're out to destroy Islam. So we've got donkeys on the one hand and Abraham's elephants on the other, and we're not looking too good in the US of A. So I think we have to encourage, to memorize the Quran is a great gift, even to memorize portions of it. And in the youth, at the young age, the child has a massive ability to absorb. And I guarantee you, even if you want your child to be a physician, or if they memorize the Quran and do nothing else from the age of about 6 to 8 years old, I guarantee you they will find school so easily. Even this Western type of training, people that have the discipline of memorizing the Quran, that facilitates memory for anything. And most 80% of knowledge in any tradition is the ability to retain definitions and information. I mean, even a good deal of medicine is remembering, the signs and symptoms and things like that, so that you can recognize them when you see them. So we should be encouraging the children to learn. I mean, I think all of our children should memorize the 40 hadiths of Imam al-Nawawi, in Arabic, and understand the meaning. That should be like just a given of a Muslim child. And they should have at least some, 5 or 6 juz of the Quran, and particularly those important chapters like that we read. I mean, the whole Quran is important, but there's ones that we're encouraged to read, like Yasin every day, Waqi'ah, Surah Al-Mulk, Alif Lam Mim, Tanzil, and Sajda, and these types of things. So I think it's sad that people don't want their children to learn Arabic. And I'll tell you another thing about Arabic. It will make you smarter if you learn it. And you might say, well, I've met a lot of Arabs that maybe they weren't that smart. But they haven't learned Fusha. Because Arabic, by its nature, it really does increase your intellect. And part of the reason is because Arabic is based on what's called harf wal ijaz, elliptical statements and economical language. And the Quran is filled with this form of language. And because of that aspect of the language, it makes you think. The Quran literally makes you think. It doesn't spell everything out for you. And that's part of the nature of the Arabic language. It's what they call in linguistics a high context language, whereas English is a low context language. In other words, English is very easy. It's all spelled out for you. So you can, you misunderstand it if you're a himar. But generally it's pretty easy to work with. Whereas Arabic is a language of subtlety and nuance, and it's very tricky. And the Arabs are notorious for tawriya and things like that. They have a thing in the Arabic from the Torah called badr, and they have this thing called badr al-ghalat, where you can call somebody an idiot and then quickly change it and correct it. Like you say, ya khabi laki. And the actual way of doing that is mean you made a mistake with the first one and you corrected it by the second one without having to say, oops, I made a mistake. You see, so they had very clever ways of calling each other names and doing things, and they have a whole history of that, what they call tawriya, and playing games with language. So it's a very intellectually stimulating language, really. And just looking into root words and delving into the language, I mean, it's a wonderful exploration. And to give our children a love of language and a love of words, that's a gift
that they will take with them for the rest of their lives, really, and love of reading. But I guarantee you, if you're allowing them to watch television, you are destroying the capacity in them at a early age to enjoy books. And I'm not making that up. Because TV at an early age cannot compete with books. It really can't. And so the children, you get them addicted to TV, and it is an addiction. Because it has withdrawal symptoms. They've proven all this stuff. They don't like to talk about it because they want everybody addicted to it. Because that's how they get their sales pitches inside the house. You see. I mean, all that stuff that they put on between the commercials, that's filler. The commercials are what they're really, that's the only reason television exists. It doesn't exist for that. That entertainment is just to keep you long enough, hoping that you'll be so vegetated out, you know, just like a vegetable. That's what they call a couch potato. And you sit there in what they call a passive receptive mode. That's what their scientists who study television's effects on the brain, they say you enter into a passive receptive mode, which in sales shift, that is the ideal state for the customer to be in, a passive receptive mode. So that's what you're doing. You're putting your children into a passive receptive, and then you're wondering why they're jumping up and down at the store demanding that they get their box of tricks or something like that. Well, they're just doing what they were told to do on the TV. You see, that's also, don't blame them, blame the shaitan that you put them in front of to educate them and teach them. It's called the one-eyed babysitter, right? And in Arabic, that's not even a nice metaphor. Because we know who the one-eyed one is, and I'm not suggesting you tell him the job, but I would suggest that he's got a lot in common with the Dajjal. Difference of opinion, the four imams differ about that. Imam Malik, which is the school that I learned, he thinks that khutbah is invalid in anything other than Arabic. That's the Malik and the Hanbali position. And he actually said if there's nobody that can give a khutbah in Arabic, that they should pray dhuhr. But that's not the opinion of Imam Shafi'i or Abu Hanifa. In the Maraqi al-Falah, it says, وَالْخُطْبَةُ وَلَوْ بِالْفَارِسِيَّةِ, even if it was in Persian. And also in the Shafi'i madhab, as long as 5 conditions are fulfilled, which have to do with the tawsiyah, with saying, making praise of Allah, asking forgiveness for the mu'mineen, encouraging the taqwa, and praying on the Prophet ﷺ. As long as those are fulfilled in Arabic, then the khutbah can be in another language. So I think that has to do with the ijtihad of the community in terms of, if the majority of the people are Arab and can understand Arabic, and that I think ultimately is left up to the imam and the jama'ah. But one of the important things about the khutbah is that it's meant to be a wa'al, an admonition to be understood by the people. And there's 2 ways that you go about that. If you do put it into Arabic, one of the ways that they do in many Muslim countries, I lived in Algeria and studied there, and a lot of the Algerians cannot understand classical Arabic, so they don't understand the khutbah anyway. And so what many of the imams would do is they would give a talk in Darija before the khutbah for the awam, the simple people that weren't educated in classical Arabic, and then they would give the khutbah in classical Arabic. And in Pakistan, also many of the masajid, despite the fact most people that are Hanafi, they give the khutbah in Arabic, but then have a talk in Urdu or whatever the local language, Pushtu or the Punjabi language in the masjid. So there are different ways around that, and I think that's based on what the community and what the imam of the community sees as the best thing for the community. It's interesting that for centuries, the church itself, it was in Latin, and people couldn't understand the Mass in churches. So even the Christians did have that tradition, but they threw it out. So it's not alien even to the Christian tradition, the idea of having a sacerdotal or a sacred language, even though Latin is not really, certainly not the language of the Bible. Just, in terms of learning language, there's several ways of going about it. One of the common ways in the schools is to teach through the medium of English and through the medium of English grammar. And there's some benefit in that, but also there's some problems with it because they're very different languages. And I found personally that the Orientalists often actually would, you end up learning English grammar better than you Arabic grammar in many of those books. And the other one of the tragic things that's happening in the Arab world due to what they call modern standard Arabic is that most of the hack writers who write for the newspapers in the Muslim countries, Arab countries, they take these Reuters and Associated Press and UPI, and they do direct translations. They don't even think about how Arabs would say it. They just translate it from the English, and kind of it becomes like English with Arabic words. So a lot of the syntax has become, English syntax, but the language is Arabic. And that's a tragedy. And also many idioms that are alien to Arabic. For instance, the idea of la'iba dawran, they played a role. That's not an Arab idiom, because the idea of lu'ab has nothing to do with serious matters. Lu'ab is about playing and jesting. And the idea of America playing an important role. And they are playing, because that's their deen, lu'ab wa lahu. That's not our deen. And so that was alien concept, because it comes out of a people that have a tradition of theater. And the Muslims traditionally did not have a tradition of theater, with the exception of Iran, who had a pre-Islamic tradition of theater. The Arabs did not have masrahiyat. It's a modern phenomenon that came out of the impact of colonialism on the Muslim countries. And now, unfortunately, there's Muslim Arabs writing masrahiyat and khayalat and all these. They produce like Naguib Mahfouz. It's like they give him the Nobel Prize because he's just become a Westerner in his whole outlook and mentality. A fiction writer. Our great scholars never wrote fiction. They wrote haqq. They wrote truth. And Alf Layla wa Layla, which they translated love, that was a book that was shunned and looked down upon. It had no merit in the Islamic tradition at all. And it was actually put in by people that were trying to undermine the Khilafah at that time. The political intrigue and things like that. It was kind of like a pornographic book that was written to kind of get youth and things wasting their time reading those type of things. So really, we don't have a tradition of that. And now, unfortunately, there's Muslims that are becoming fiction writers and these type of things, and it's very sad. It's really sad that that's all. But this is the lizard's hole that our Prophet told us we would go down. And he said that, even he said if one of them sleeps with his mother, one of my ummah is going to do the same thing. That's how the love. And one of the things that we miss in the hadith is the intonation. Although in the riwayah there is a type of naqal that has to do with if the Prophet laughed, then the rawi of the hadith would laugh. That is a type of riwayah in hadith literature. But we don't often know how the intonation was. And in that hadith when it says that سَنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ شِبْرًا بِشِبْرًا ذِرَاعًا بِذِرَاعٍ حَتَّى لَوْ دَخَلَ جُحْرَ ضَبٍّ لَدَخَلْتُمُوهُ. When the Sahaba say al-Yahud wa Nasara, my image of that is them saying al-Yahud wa Nasara, Ya Rasulullah, like they're just so amazed. And he said, فَمَنْ, who, if not them, who are you going to follow? But they were so far from that idea, but now we're living it. We're seeing and that's one of the blessings of the signs of the end of time, is that just like the Sahaba got to see the mu'jizat, they didn't get to see the ghaybiyat, the khabar al-ghaybi that the Prophet gave, but we're witnessing the ghaybiyat that they didn't get to see. So we have a gift also in seeing the truth of our Prophet ﷺ. So that's one of the signs that he was the messenger of Allah, that he was sadiq in his khabar, in his words, truthful in his speech. Can you please give us your advice about our children playing computer games? Throw them out. Not the children, the computer games. I think those computer games are very insidious. Really, they're very dangerous. And I'll tell you something. Recognize that this is a very recent technology. It has not been studied. Its long-term effects have not been studied. We know that watching television, because it has been studied up close, has very serious effects on the brain. And I'm not going to be surprised if in 20 or 30 years from now there's going to be a lot of people with brain tumors and things like this. Really, I won't be surprised if that happens at all. But we have to recognize this is a very new technology, and we really don't know what impact is happening on developing brains. Because in neurology, you know, during the first 11 years, there is massive development going on in the brains of our children. There's all of the neural connections, the networks are literally being set up. And there's myelination going on of the sheaths in which the neurotransmitters are being transmitted with. So we have to be really wary about a lot of this stuff. And my recommendation is that computers, obviously in many areas, they're becoming, you know, like a necessity. But I really think in terms of our youth, particularly before the ages of, you know, maybe 9 or 10, I would really be wary about putting them on a computer. I personally do not. I have a computer that I use for typesetting, and people have given me software for. I don't let my children near the computer. I really don't. And they don't watch television, and that's what I'm doing in my house. And really, they don't miss it. If you give them things to do, they don't miss it. Really. It's just, to me, it's a cop-out on parents' behalf. It's just an easy way of dealing with your children. It's an easy way of putting them in front. Because unfortunately, we don't have infrastructure here. We don't have extended families. The grandma's not around to give the mother a break. And so oftentimes it's easy to put the child in front of the television set, and then you get, you know, an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 of free time. But there's a big cost for that, and you're really going to regret it down the road. So my advice to all of you is invest in your children now. You know, invest in their education, and not for doing it, you know, just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you do that for the sake of Allah, Allah will rectify يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ إِنْ شَاءَ Allah. He will rectify our state, and He will forgive us our wrong actions. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. السلام عليكم.